Hello, I'm Richard Vobes, the Bald Explorer, and this is another of my story, the story of my life, my heritage. I'm sharing with you, and it seems to be going down quite well. People are interested and intrigued, and I have more to tell. So with your indulgence, I'll carry on. So in the last episode of my story, I told you when I was a security guard, and I'd been a security guard for Heidelberg. I'd been a security guard at the Royal Festival Hall and notably at TVAM, where I'd been a bit cheeky after watching Whack-A-Day and thought I'd got some ideas they might use, and I'd placed them on the desk of the producer, and I was promptly taken away from the front office as a security guard and moved into the car park. Well, I did that for a while, but to be honest with you, London was not for me. I was still living in Harrow at the time, and I was staying with some friends, and I think one of my friends who was there had moved on, and then I just felt it was a bit lonely. I didn't really know anyone. I didn't have a girlfriend. I didn't have any really close friends. I was mainly working these 12-hour shifts and going home and eating and sleeping and then going off working. It just seemed a treadmill that was not right. I'd finished my mime year, doing a course on mime, and I wanted desperately to perform. I wanted the social intercourse with like-minded friends. I remember one of my security ones, it's just suddenly this second popped into my head. I'd been a security guard at the Shell building on the River Thames there, down near wherever it is, Tower Bridgeway. And I remember going in there, sitting down in the very basement, again, another 7 to 7, 12-hour shift, 7 at night to 7 in the morning. And I arrived and the big fat security bloke who was there regular, he said, "Oh, hello." He said, "Oh, you new?" I said, "Yes." He said, "Oh, right, okay." He said, "Make yourself a cup of coffee." He said, "There's not much to do here. We don't really have to do much patrolling." He gave me a chair on a little desk, and he opened a drawer and he brought out all these magazines and he just dumped them in front of me as I sat down with my cup of coffee. And he said, "There you go. That'll help you get through the night." And I looked at these magazines and they were all girly magazines. And he was just quite happily sitting there all the night looking at pornographic material. And I felt very awkward about that. Whether one watches or looks at pornographic material is entirely a personal thing. But I didn't want to sit there with a burly bloke who I didn't know and just be reading this. I actually had in my bag books, because I've always liked to read, and so I did pass on the girly magazine and made some quip and said, "Well, actually I'm reading a bit of this," whatever it was, I can't remember obviously. And that was just one night, and I realised that this was not for me. I couldn't go on doing this. I trained, I had a career that I wanted to pursue. I wanted to do theatre, and I arranged with my mother to return back to Sussex. Now, she had left the house, our family home, that had been sold. My parents had been divorced, and in the past, I think I've told you this, that my mum and dad had separated when I was 10. Dad had been desperate to sell the house, but he couldn't do that until we'd all left home when we were over 18, and my sister had to be over 18. Mum then had sold the house, and she'd gone on a round trip round the world, and she'd come back and she'd started to work for people who were elderly, and she was a carer, and she advertised her services in The Lady, which was a magazine that the more well-to-do ladies would have. And so she was working on all sorts of different places as a carer or a warden. And on this particular occasion, she was now working as a warden for I think this is, I don't know what you call this, assisted living, something like that, where old people live in a big house or a big establishment. They're all in their own flats, they're all self-contained, they look after themselves, they feed themselves, they do everything for themselves. But on hand is a warden should there be problems. So they would all have an emergency cord that if they fell over and they needed help. And so this was a big old country house. I think it was one of these big houses that was actually built around the 1920s. So not dreadfully old, but a very large country estate type thing in the edge of Horsham, up I think near Roffey, if I remember rightly. And so she lived in a bungalow adjacent to this, and I think there were 8 flats inside the house, and they were all vegetarians. Now my mother wasn't vegetarian, and she would scoff chicken and beef and pork and all of that. It didn't matter that she wasn't vegetarian, although I got this feeling in the back of my head that she had told them that she was. I think because, that's right, she had to cook. I think she had to cook certain meals, maybe an evening meal, and they all collected it and then they all went to their flats. I think that's how that happened. It's a long time ago, and I never really got involved with any of them, and I never met any of them. So I left Harrow, where I was living, and moved down to stay temporarily with my mum while I fixed myself up and try and find somewhere to live. Now, the arrangement was a bit odd because my mum was a warden in this bungalow that had a spare room. But my mum, being the canny woman that she was, she rented, and she wasn't supposed to do this, well, she didn't rent it so much, she had a lodger. This lodger, who had the spare room, the rules were, and it worked for him, was that he wasn't supposed to be there at the weekend and he couldn't be around in the daytime. But as he commuted from somewhere, he came down to Horsham and he worked Monday to Friday. So he would arrive Monday night and he would stay during the week and then leave Friday morning. And he would get up about 7 o'clock and by 8 o'clock he'd gone. So I didn't have anywhere to sleep as such, but when I was living in Harrow, I can't remember if I told you this, I slept on the floor. I did have a bed, but the bed was a bit knackered and crappy, and I'd said to the landlady when I was there, I said, would you mind if I didn't have the bed? And she said, well, it's entirely up to you, because it was a smallish room, but I wanted as much space as I could, because at the time I was working out, doing home working out, you know, with there was some weights actually. I think the landlady's ex-boyfriend had left some weights, and I still have them in actual fact, because I think I took them when I went. I had acquired those, nobody wanted them, and I was doing some weight and I was carrying on with my mime exercises. So the bed was really in the way, and I just got used to sleeping on the floor. So when I moved to Sussex, I said to Mum, she said, well, I've got nowhere to put you. I said, well, I can sleep on the floor, I don't care where it is. I won't be here in the daytime, because that was another thing. I wasn't supposed to be there. I wasn't supposed to be there at all. So she said, well, you can sleep on the floor. So the layout of the bungalow that she was in was, her bedroom was on one side, the lodger's bedroom was on the other side, and then there was this communal space, the sort of lounge area, and a small kitchen in between. So the lodger didn't know I existed. I came in when he'd gone to his room, so I had to come back about 8 o'clock at night, and I'll tell you where I'd been in a minute. I would then spend the night on the floor. I would have to clear off before the lodger got up, so I would get up and go before, and have quick breakfast and go before the lodger got up at 7. So, and I did this for about 8 months. I mean, it's totally ridiculous, really. And I would just sleep on the floor. I think there was a very thin mattress I had. Now, my mum had been carrying some of my stuff from my childhood since the house had been sold, and it was in the attic, along with some of my early Super 8 films and bits and bobs, which unfortunately, sadly, has all got lost. And it's probably still in the attic of the bungalow, or it's probably been cleared out now. Years and years have gone by. Anyway, so I was travelling pretty much light because I didn't have very much, and any of my other stuff had been plonked up in her attic. So I had basically a suitcase full of clothes. I would sleep on the floor. I would get up before the lodger and disappear. At that time, I had bought myself, I think, I'm trying to remember which car I had, because at one point, and it is around that time, I had a green left-hand drive Beetle. And it was a lovely car, but it was very intimate. You know, any passenger, you had to be on really friendly terms. It was a Herbie car, but it was left-hand drive instead of the traditional right-hand drive that we have here in the UK. I'd also, because I was still doing my teaching that I had been doing before I went to mime school of mime and drama, I was still doing teaching around the amateur drama societies, and also I was doing the Lodge Hill courses. So I was earning a little bit of money from that, but not much, and I was staying on my mum's floor. But in the day, most of the daytime and most of the week, I had to go somewhere. But through my drama and through my contacts doing Lodge Hill and things like that, I became friendly through friends of friends with a lady, a French lady called Muriel, who ran a place called Dance Industry in Littlehampton. Now this was in a warehouse on 2 levels. Well, they had a ground floor and then two levels, 2 floors above it. And I believe the ground floor was run, was a warehouse for a furniture company, if I remember rightly. Above was these dance studios with sprung floors, and it was, you know, for young girls mainly, who would do dance classes and take lambda exams or whatever the exams are for classes and that sort of thing. And they had this tiny little room, which used to be an old, I think it used to be a reception room. So as people came up the stairs to go to the drama courses, they would be meted and greeted by somebody. Well, this was being disused. And I knew people, and we would hang out there at Dance Industry. And I asked, would it be possible to hire the little room as an office? And we agreed terms. I can't remember what it was now, probably something like £30 a month or something, but I can't remember. And so I would rent this office. I had a phone line, my own phone line put in, which was the same number that I had had in London, I think, if I remember rightly, or maybe it can't have been because London was a different number. Yeah, that's true. But anyway, I remember taking the same phone unit, and I had an answer machine. So I would go down from Horsham, which is about 25 miles, every morning at the crack of dawn. I would leave my mum's floor, get in the car, disappear, go down, hang around at Dance Industry in this little office. And I also, because I was renting the office, when there were no classes being held in the on the dance floors, whichever one it was, I was allowed to do my exercises, and part of the thing was to put together a mime show to travel around with, which is why I wanted to be there. And of course they had all the mirrors, and so I started to put together a mime a piece of theatre, and I'm going to tell you about that in a different video because that's a whole different story, obviously. So that's what I was doing. And then they had a little cafe, which was really where everybody congregated and where new people would be signed up, and the reception and all of that was up in the little cafe, and it encouraged people to buy cups of coffee. So I would hang around with my friends up there, and it was a very lovely atmosphere, and they were all very nice people, and we all got on, and we had, you know, silly times. But I would go back into my office and I was writing. I was still doing my writing children's things, writing plays, desperate to try and further my career as best as I could, in between teaching mime here, there and everywhere for whatever I could get away with. And I had this phone line and I had an answer machine, and I was trying to put together the theatre company. And also I had heard about extra work and walk-on parts. And I thought, well, I'd wanted to do this, and as I'd said in a previous one, I went to a advertising agency for commercials, and I'd been told that I needed to wear a wig because I was bald, or going bald. I had hair all around here, but I was going bald on top. And they said you needed to get a wig because you can't sell chocolate, because it would imply that eat chocolate you'll go bald. And I decided I wasn't going to get a wig, so that didn't happen. But then I discovered the Elliot Agency in Brighton. Now, Marcelle Elliot was a lovely lady. She's no longer with us, unfortunately. And her partner, who was an ex-dancer, Ian, they were an incredibly theatrical couple. And they had this pokey little office, probably the same sort of size that my little cubbyhole was. And I remember going to see them to see if I could get on their books and get some work as an extra in television programs. Now, initially I wanted to get into films, because that's, you know, much more grand and what have you. To be an extra into some of these blockbusters would have been fantastic, and you'd do some amazing things. But, and you've probably heard the term central casting, which was an agency. But I think you needed to be in London, because very often, as I remember, these castings would happen a bit like this, and you just had to go and do it. And it would be for the next day, and often you didn't know what you were doing and where you were going and all of that. And being right down in Sussex and having car journeys or train journeys, it wasn't really feasible to do that. But at the Elliot Agency, you would get work on television programs, and it was reasonable pay for doing basically not very much. And I'm going to tell you more about the extra work in another video when that comes up. But it was, at least you'd know 2 or 3 days in advance when the work was coming in. Now, there were a number of these extra agencies, but I seem to remember that Marcelle's agency, the Elliot Agency, you could go in her book and it was free, whereas many of the others would charge you 50 quid, 100 quid. And what you had to do was provide photographs of yourself in different positions, in different outfits. You know, I think you had to have a 10 by 8 of Head and Shoulders, and then a full length, so that the casting directors on television programs could have a look at you and go, yeah, we'll have, you know, young man in his, what was I then? I guess I must have been in my late 20s. Young man in late 20s will have, you know, 3 or 4 of those, and women of a certain type, for whatever program, you see. So I remember going to the Elliot Agency, and it, as I say, pokey little place, full of smoke, billowing everywhere as I came into the door in Brighton. And through the back of this smoke, Marcelle is sitting behind a desk. Now, this is before computers, before the internet, a typewriter, filing cabinets, pictures and posters and all of that, and all these, you know, the old sort of Rolodex type thing, index cards in boxes. It was all that sort of stuff. And I came in, and there was a chair in front of the desk, and that she was smoking an ashtray full of ash, you know. So, oh, hello, darling, do come in, sit down, darling, lovely to meet you, I'm Marcelle. Hello, Marcelle. And she was only a small, little, bubbly little thing of a woman, and pretty old when I went to meet her. She must have been in her sort of 60s, I suppose, when I joined up, smoking, chain smoking. It was hilarious, really. Anyway, so I said, she said, what would you want to do? And I told her my aims, and she said, oh, have you got any special skills? Can you ride a horse and this, that, and the other? I said, well, I drive, and I'm trained mime artist. She said, oh, marvellous, love, marvellous, loads of work for you, loads of work. Anyway, I signed up, and she said, yes, it'll be, you know, your phone won't stop ringing. All of this. I'm sure I can put you in a lot of different things. So that was great. I didn't have to pay anything, and then I went back to dance industry, back to my office, and waited for the phone to ring. And I waited, and I waited. And at first I was busy doing other things. Obviously I wasn't sitting there, I was still writing and doing all my other stuff. And the phone didn't ring for a couple of weeks. And then suddenly it did ring, and it was, hello, Richard, darling, it's Marcelle here, Elliot Agency. You may remember, came to see us. Yes, I do have a job for you. You'll be absolutely fantastic for it. It's just up your street. And this was the first job that I did, and I was very excited. And I'm going to tell you about that in the next episode. Ha! Another cliffhanger. Anyway, I hope you've enjoyed listening to my story. There'll be more of that coming along. Lots more to tell you. It's been a very unusual life, really, and it still is. I'm thrilled to be able to share it with you. Don't forget to follow, like, subscribe, give me a thumbs up if you've enjoyed it, and become a patron, support what I do. I'll be out and about making more videos. Until next time, thanks for watching. Bye-bye.